Okay guys, so here's my little home solar observatory. It's not really an observatory, it's my telescope set up on my balcony here. But we'll start inside here. I'll give you a quick tour. Got my laptop, I've got the controller for my mount and the controller for my focuser inside. And I use a little external SanDisk SSD drive that I call my Astro drive. That's where I record all my files to on the laptop here. And then of course I've got Titan, who is my trusty sidekick who kind of keeps an eye on everything while we're working. Now we'll go outside and I'll give you a quick tour of the telescope. So this is a Lunt 80 millimeter hydrogen alpha telescope, pressure tuner. You can see the model number there. Probably shouldn't be showing you my serial number, but I guess it doesn't really matter. I've got a ZWO 1600 mm. This is the original 1600 by ZWO. They have come out with several models now. The newer model has a larger buffer, and it also has a USB hub built into it instead of this guide port here. So that's kind of a handy feature, but I'm still rocking the original here. And then something that a couple people have asked me about is the solar guider. So this is mounted on top of the scope instead of a regular little solar finder scope. It is a electronic solar guider made by this company Astro HUTEC. And what it does is, you'll notice that there's two little sensors on the top here. Collects the sunlight. There's also like a little for like just when you first set up, a little manual solar finder scope. Currently right here at this second, we're looking at clouds, so I'm not seeing anything. When the sun comes back out, it'll project a little yellow dot right here. It is connected by two cables, a USB cable here that is going to my laptop, and then the Cat 5 cable here is going to the mount to the guide port, plugged in right here. So that's pretty much it. As far as the telescope goes, it's turned on. It's actually tracking right now. I have not even done an alignment yet. So as soon as we get a little break in the clouds, we'll be able to do a quick alignment, and hopefully I'll be able to show you the whole process I use for capturing. And then we'll move on to the image processing. Okay, so we're going to start out here in SharpCap. I use SharpCap Pro, and the main reason I use SharpCap Pro is because in the regular free version, I don't believe you have scripting available. And I use scripts, and I'll show you one of the scripts that I use here in a second. But we're going to go ahead and connect to the ZWO 1600 camera. Of course, it's not seeing anything right now because we've got clouds out. But normally what I capture, if I'm just doing a close-up of a solar prominence region, is I capture an area that's 1000 by 1000 pixels. I use mono 8-bit color space. There is an option of 16-bit, but I have not seen a lot of difference other than a huge increase in file size when it comes to capturing these monochrome images of the sun's prominences or the surface features. I usually capture in a SIR file format, which is a video file format, but there's other options here available, as you can see. But SIR is the format that I capture, and I usually try to capture right in the center of the region of interest here. I capture right in the center of the chip on the camera. And then of course you just adjust the exposures however you know you need to for your image. Now I will open up the script that I use, and this is the script that I run in SharpCap that allows me to set an exposure and capture. This tells me how many frames I'm capturing. So I capture 400 frames at a time in the video clips. And this is the exposure setting, and I tell it which folder to record to, So I separate my surface details from my prominence details that you can see down here. So it automatically labels them surface with the current time, and then it goes into the surface folder, and then down here you can see the prominences go in the prominence folder. I have a little bit of a delay in the recordings, so what it will do is it will record these 400 frames, and you'll see here that it will sleep for 5 seconds, and then it will set the exposure for the prominence. It will wait 1 second before it actually captures. And the reason I do that is because if I don't put a 1 second delay in there, the first frame of the prominence video file will be the same exposure as the surface file. I hope that makes sense. So you have to put kind of a delay in there, otherwise it doesn't change it. It changes exposures, but it also starts recording like almost instantly, so it captures like 1 or 2 frames of the old exposure before it starts capturing the new exposure. That's an issue I ran into when I was capturing the Mercury transit back in November. So once it's captured 400 frames of that, waited 5 seconds, and then captured 400 frames of the prominence detail, it will sleep for 15 seconds. So it's a total of 15 and 5. So I think this should actually read 20 seconds here instead of 25. And then it just starts the whole script over again. So the really nice thing is that once you're done, you have 2 folders. You have a folder labeled surface, you have a folder labeled prom, and the files are neatly organized in there so you can process them separately. That's about it as far as the capture process goes. I'll open up the high-node solar guider here now so you can see. So it's a pretty simple process. You hit connect here and it will connect to the guider. The first thing you have to do is you have to calibrate. If you had a permanent installation, you could store your calibration for in the morning when it's on one side of the meridian, and store your calibration for the afternoon when it's on the other side of the meridian, and then you could just recall these. But since I'm constantly setting up and tearing down every day, since I don't have a permanent install, I have to do a calibration every day. I usually set it on the second point here. I guess these are like 3 different levels of calibration. And it's, as you can see right here, the sun intensity is at -10 right now because it's basically not seeing the sun at all. We really, in order for me to kind of explain this whole calibration guiding process, we have to have a little bit of sunshine, which it doesn't look like we're going to have today. This is the solar guider that's mounted on the scope. You can see it's guiding now. And this is the guide corrections that it's doing. It shows the intensity of the sun. It usually sets right here, right about -2. So this is a good indicator if you have clouds or anything that rolled through. You would see definitely dip in the intensity.
Okay, so the first thing to do when I start with my processing is I try to keep everything really organized, because you're going to have multiple folders of files here. So it's best to be as organized as possible, and I will show you what I'm talking about here. So I'm just going to use a sample of 10 images that I captured yesterday for this tutorial, and I've got a folder here labeled ImPPG processed, aligned, and an AutoStakkert folder, and then this is just the folder that I'm keeping my cell phone clips that I use to make the footage for the video for the rest of the tutorial here. But we're going to get into the AutoStakkert folder first. There's nothing there, so we're going to launch AutoStakkert, and I'm using AutoStakkert version 3, which you can find online. I'm running dual monitors here, so I've got to drag things over here so you guys can see what's going on here. So the first thing I do is I don't click on open. I know that seems like counterintuitive, because that's what you want to do, is you want to open. But what you really want to do is you want to open is great if you're just processing a single image. But if you're processing multiple images and you want to do it like a batch process, you go to open here under file. And now we're going to find our folder that has our clips. Here's our 10 images that we're going to process today, and click open. And the first thing that pops up is the screen here. Normally I would click improve tracking, but it takes a little bit longer, so for the tutorial today I'm going to leave improve tracking unclicked, and if you're doing solar processing, you want to click on surface. So the first thing you do is you go over here and you control click on an area that has some edge detail and possibly a prominence in it, the main thing that you really want to track. So this is the area that we want to track here. So at this point here, what's happening is it's only going to process one image, but it's actually going to do all 10 images after you do the settings for the first image. So we're going to click Analyze. It's analyzed the image now, and I'm not an expert by any means at AutoStakkert, but it's my understanding that this graph here kind of shows a scale of your best image on the left and your worst images on the right. And I generally try to pick a number that's less than where this graph, the green line here, crosses the 50% mark. So it looks like it's crossing right at about 50%. So I would choose something a little lower than that. So I use 40% of the frames. You can choose an actual number. And remember, all of my clips were 400 frames. So if I wanted to just stack the best 50 frames, you could type in 50 here. I'm going to do 40%. So it'll be the best 40% of those 400. I go over here. Now I've seen people click on manual draw and draw the little boxes in here to do the alignment process here. I have never done that. I always just click place AP grid, and I try to pick a grid size that gets this number right here down below 1,000, just below 1,000. So the way you adjust that is by changing the size of these boxes. So if I click on 48, now the number is 349. Now to me that's too low, so you can go somewhere in between. So I'm going to go about 40 and see if I can get that one click lower. So we're at 843. So that's a good number. That's what I usually normally do here. I don't sharpen the images here in AutoStakkert. I've kind of found that it kind of over processes, but you can blend it. I just haven't found a really good blend. So I leave this unchecked and I save it into a folder, and you'll see why too, because like I said, I'm kind of anal about being organized with my folders. So I'm going to go ahead and hit stack. You're going to see it's going to process this first image, and then what's going to happen immediately following that is it's going to go right into the next image. So you can see it's 10% complete here. That's because it's done one of the 10 images. So it's actually working on the second image now. The second image looked like it was a much higher quality image than that first one. I say image, we're talking about video clips here, but we'll let this finish off. Okay, so we're coming up on the last two images here, and it's just about finished. Now, like I said at the beginning, I'm not an AutoStakkert expert. I'm not an expert in any of this, actually, but if anybody has any suggestions on maybe why I should manually draw the alignment squares or any of these other settings that you see that I've got maybe set differently than you here in AutoStakkert, I would love some feedback on that. So we are finished now with the AutoStakkert process, and we can go ahead and close that out. And if I go up to back to my main folder here, you can see that it put everything into a different folder here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this folder and drag it into the AutoStakkert folder. So now all of my stacked images are here, and I'll just kind of scroll through these, and you can kind of see how the image jumps around a little bit in between exposures. But we're going to take care of that in the next program, which is ImPPG. So that'll be our next part of the tutorial. Okay, so we finished with AutoStakkert. Now it's time to launch the next program in the sequence here, which is ImPPG. I'm going to just reduce the size of this so you can see our original folder down here.
let's see. So for ImPPG, it's not quite as easy to do a batch process because you have to process your first image manually, and then you have to save what you did as a batch or a processing file. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up and we're going to go to our current project. Our files are in the AutoStakkert folder here, and we are going to open up our first image. Now again, this is another one of those programs that I am by no means an expert at, so any suggestions you have here, I'll make this full screen so everybody can see it good. I generally don't like the default processing here. I always click prevent ringing because it does seem to prevent a little bit of a halo or something that comes in along the edge here, but I will tune this down just a little bit. It starts out at 1.3 and I'll bring it down to about 1.2, and then again, it's a matter of personal taste. I fool around with these sliders here until I see something that kind of like looks like a good image for me. I will open up the tone curve here, and I use it sometimes to adjust the black levels. I want to get the sky as black as possible, so you can kind of like bring that down there, and you try to just a balancing game here. You don't want to bring it down too much because then you'll lose a little bit of detail in the prominence. But just for the purpose of this tutorial, normally I would spend a good bit more time on this. I'm going to say that that's good. So you click this button here and it processes the entire image. Okay, so now we've got our first image processed. So the next step is you go in and you save the process settings. So I am going to go back into our ImPPG processed folder here, and I'm going to save this and just say processed, give it a name there. Okay, and now I'm not going to actually save this image because I'm getting ready to do a batch process. You go under file, go to batch process. Now I'm going to add all of the files from that folder. Here we go. They're in AutoStakkert and here. So this is our 10 images that we're going to process now. Click open. Now here is where you select the file that you just made, the processing file. So we're going to go to here, and again, that's the one from the other day. So this is the processed settings, and now you tell it where you want it to put it. So I'm going to tell it to put it into the, guess where, ImPPG processed folder. So the finished images are going to go in there, and I save these out as TIFF 16 bits for this step. So we process this, and as you can see, it takes no time whatsoever for ImPPG to do this process. So they're all done. We'll close this. We'll close or we'll minimize ImPPG temporarily, and we'll go into our ImPPG processed folder, and you can see now we've got all of the images, and we can scan through them here, and as you can see, they're still not quite aligned, but we've got our time-lapse, our individual frames processed at this point. So our next step is to do the alignment, and I use the same program. I wish there was a way to do the processing and the alignment all in one step, but I guess that's asking for a little too much at this point. So the next thing you do is you go under, in ImPPG, you go under Tools, and you go to Align Image Sequence. Okay, so now you're going to add the files that you just processed. So we're going to go back into our ImPPG processed folder, and we're going to select these 10 images. We're going to click Open. Now they're in here. What I have found is that if I leave it with the normal settings here, it's almost always going to fail. It's going to tell me it was unable to do an alignment. But if I change this to Pad to Bounding Box, and I leave this on Stabilize, even though it seems like you would want to click on Align on Solar Image, I leave this on Stabilize High Contrast Features. Then I select the Output folder, and as you can probably guess, the Output folder is going to be the ImPPG aligned folder. So we're going to select this folder, and if you blink you're going to miss it. So it's done. So it just analyzed all 10 of those images and then resaved them and align them. So we're going to close this, we're going to close this, and we're going to close ImPPG, and we're going to go back up to our aligned folder, and we now have 10 images that, as we cycle through, you should see that the prominence and the solar disk itself stays perfectly aligned. Now you will see this little black edge, and that's that part where it said, where you had the option in the alignment process to pad to bounding boxes. So what it's done is it's decided which image is, I guess, the best, and it's stabilized all the other images around it, and you can see that the bounding box leaves a little bit of a black border, but that's okay because we're going to fix that in our next step, which is bringing it into the editing program of your choice. I happen to use Davinci Resolve, so that'll be our next program. I'm launching Davinci Resolve. This is the editing program that I use, but the steps that I'm going to show you here could be done in Premiere, it could be done in Final Cut, Avid. Those are the other programs, editing programs that I know of. I'm sure there's a lot more. There's probably a lot simpler programs out there too. This is going to be a little difficult for me to show you every single portion of the step because I use 3 monitors in editing, and Davinci Resolve stretches out across all 3 monitors. So first step is I go into the media here, and again, this is not showing you, you know what, I'm going to go into the cut page here because the media pool is showing up right here, and I'm going to import the media here. So the media that I'm going to import is the 10 images that were processed and aligned in ImPPG. So I'm going to just bring these 10 in, and now we can see that they're in here. Now, one of the features that's nice about Davinci Resolve, if I go up into my preferences, is and go to user and go to editing. When I import stills, I can decide how long each one of the stills are going to be when I import them. By default, I think it's set to 10 seconds, so that if you're bringing in a still image to edit with, you have a decent sized clip to edit with. But you can also bring stills in by frames, and I bring them in as 2 frames because I find that just bringing in as a single frame, the video just flies by really fast, and I end up having to slow it down. So why not just go ahead and make them 2 frames each anyway? So that's one of the nice features there. And the easiest way to bring them into the timeline here in Resolve is to just select them all and bring them down here, and boom, there you're dropped in. So now you can see that they're there. I can hit loop and I can play them, and it's playing those same 10 frames over and over and over again, as you see there. Now you notice the wobble around the edge. That's the little pad to bounding box issue that we saw. So I'll show you the way that we eliminate that here. So I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to go into the edit tab, which I think should keep everything visible that needs to be visible here on this screen. Yeah, see, off to this side here I've got another window with a lot of tools and stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in an adjustment clip, and I'm going to set this adjustment clip above all 10 of those images, and I am going to make this the same size as the clip. In this adjustment clip, I'm going to go up here to crop, open the window here, and I'm going to bring the left side in, and you can set this to where it just starts to crop in there. I'm going to do the same thing on the right hand side. You can see the wall coming in on the right hand side here now, and I'm going to set it right about there. I'm going to crop the top, and I'm going to crop the bottom. So now if I play this, you can see, let me stop this and make the window a little bit bigger so you guys can see it a little better. So now you can see the time lapse is playing, and you're not being distracted by that little bounding box around the edge. And sometimes you have to adjust this because it might jump into the frame. But that's the first step. Now the next step I do is I want to colorize this image, or let's just say I want to rotate it. I can come in and rotate this image right now. Let's say I wanted to rotate this 90 degrees. Boom. Now our time lapse is sort of, even though that was the western edge, I always kind of like to have my prominences in the disc facing the disc going down and the prominences going up if I'm just doing a isolated capture like this. So next step is to colorize it, and so I will go into the color tab here. See if I can make this window a little bigger so you guys can see what's going on. I don't know if I can reduce this any smaller. I don't think I can, but I go into primary wheels here, and I will, actually I'm sorry, I stay in primary bars, and I will come over here and I will crank up the red, and I will lower in the gain, I will lower the green and the blue, and then I'll go to gamma, I'll do the same thing, and then what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to find a happy color, something that I'm happy with here. And you're just fooling around with the lift, which is the shadows. As you can see, the background is changing. The darker areas are changing more when I adjust the lift here. The gain is the highlights, and the gamma is sort of the midtones. That's kind of, you know, for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm pretty happy with that. And the next step would be to go to the Fairlight tab, which would add music, but we're not gonna bother doing that now. So we'll go right to deliver, and then I output my file, and I'm done. And that's pretty much the process I use for editing my solar time lapses. I hope this was helpful. I know if you're not using Davinci Resolve, there is a free version that does everything that I just did. I have the studio version that has more capabilities that I use for my work, but nothing that I did in Davinci Resolve cannot be done in the free version of Davinci Resolve. So if you're thinking about learning a new editing program, I would highly recommend giving Davinci Resolve a try. It's got great color panels, it's got great audio editing capabilities. Fusion is just a quick plug for Davinci Resolve. I really like it because I'm trying to get away from Adobe products. I used to use Adobe Premiere Pro for editing, and I use After Effects for the visual effects, and then I used Audition for editing my audio, and then you have to use Adobe Media Encoder, and basically all of those features are here. So you've got the cut and the edit tab here that is Premiere Pro. You've got Fusion, which is the similar to After Effects. You've got color, which is, I don't even know what Premiere Pro uses that's anywhere near. I mean, Davinci Resolve was originally a colorist application, so there's nothing that Adobe makes that can compete with this. Fairlight would be the equivalent to Adobe's Audition, and then Deliver would be the equivalent to Adobe's Media Encoder. So if you want to give a new program a try, I would definitely recommend Davinci Resolve. And that's it for my solar tutorial.